Boom, I think boom. Is this one working? Seems like we're getting some sound through that, are we? Forgive me guys, a new soundboard being set up here, so your microphone is unmuted but has no signal. God damn it, what's going on here? Meeting hasn't started yet anyway, so not to worry. I'm just trying to sort this back out. Maybe that's it. Boom. I think that might be working better, is it? Is that? No. Alright, Bogwan. Alright, John, Bobby. That was chronic. What's happening, lads? How's the sound on your side? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Sounds like I can hear my kids. Is my this is what's happening. It's coming through this and not my road. Settings, audio. I can definitely hear the kids there. What's that about? That sorted it out. Still coming through this, isn't it? I know, what if I just freaking unplug this one altogether? So this is now. For fuck's sake. I plugged out the wrong one. What a dumbass. Has this plugged that out? No. What the fuck have I plugged out now?
1184, the quorum for the joint committee.
Here we go, never mind me.
Quorum now, so I can call the meeting to order and advise members that we are in a public session. So the cameras have now started to roll. I have. Where's my. This is. Oh, yeah. Sorry, just to say we have apologies from Deputies John Paul O'Shea and Senator Evan McQuillan. So I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the third public meeting of the Joint Committee on Drug Use to discuss kinship care and care. I welcome our witnesses who we'll engage with later in the meeting, and I'll introduce you as we're calling you out to speak, if that's okay. Our agenda items today are engagement on the topic of kinship care, and we'll follow that on with AOB from members. A note on privileges. All witnesses and members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It is imperative that you comply with any such direction. I would like to remind members of the constitutional requirements. In order to participate in public meetings, members must be physically present within the confines of Leinster House complex. Members of the committee attending remotely must do so from within the precincts of Leinster House. This is due to the constitutional requirement that in order to participate in public meetings, members must be physically present within the confines of the place where Parliament is chosen to sit. In this regard, I would ask any member partaking via MS Teams that prior to making their contribution to the meeting that you confirm that you are on the grounds of the Leinster House campus. So that's done. Again, I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses to begin engagement on a third hearing in the public session on kinship care and care. It is timely that we are holding this session during Kinship Care Week that has taken place from the 6th to the 12th of October, and a national celebration of these incredible families who step in to care for our children when parents cannot. All of the opening statements have been circulated to members of the committee and will be published on the Oireachtas website for the session as agreed, which we will limit each opening statement to 5 minutes. This may allow plenty of time for questions and answers. I'm aware that a wide range of issues will be subject to discussion today. If necessary, further and more detailed information on certain issues raised can be sent to the Clerk of the Committee for circulation to members. You're all very welcome. Just before we pass over to yourselves, just to say at different times we will have different TDs and senators coming in and out. It's unfortunate we all sometimes have to be in 2 or 3 different places at once, but that will change as we go along. So our first contributor is Mr. Wayne Stanley to give you an open statement on behalf of EPIC. Mr. Stanley, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present today. For those who don't know, EPIC, Empowering People in Care, is an independent child's rights organisation which works with and for children in state care and care leavers up to the age of 26. The central pillars of our work are the provision of an independent human rights-based advocacy service, our youth engagement and participation programme, and our commitment to knowledge exchange. And that is about taking the experience of the young people that we engage with and communicating that to stakeholders. And that's why today is such an important opportunity for us. I'm joined today by my colleague Fiona Murray, who's the head of our advocacy service and works for more years than she'd like me to say, with care experienced young folk and a fountain of knowledge for that hopefully the committee can take advantage of. While those in the room will be aware, it's important to put on record that most young people in the care system have positive experiences. Even where those experiences are difficult, young people are resilient and successful. EPIC has worked with young people who have faced multiple placements, early school leaving, mental health crises and homelessness. And in the faces of these challenges, they have become mature, empathetic adults that are changing lives in our care system today. And that's always important to remember. It's also important to reiterate, as other presenters to this committee have done, that drug use is a societal issue. It's not a consequence of being in care. Problematic drug use and addiction are often a response to trauma, and in particular a response to the feelings of loss and abandonment. For some, substance use can become a form of self-medication for mental health issues. For those in care, responses to unresolved trauma can lead to placement breakdown, which can deepen feelings of loss and abandonment and spiral into further drug use and more difficult care experiences. Challenges can extend beyond illegal drugs. EPIC's National Advocacy Service has worked with young people using legal drugs such as spiced vapes, over-the-counter painkillers and prescription drugs, believing they're safe or less harmful. For some young people we work with, these substances in combination with underlying health difficulties has resulted in hospital admissions. EPIC provides services across the care system, including working with children and young people with the highest support needs, such as those living in special care. Many of these young people report that substance misuse has contributed to them being in these facilities. Some reported getting caught up with drug dealing while living in the community. Young people have described feeling physically sick at the thought of doing this, yet unable to find a way out. We're outlining these experiences because we believe that Ireland can do better for care experienced children and young people. There are ways forward, improving services for those actively in addiction, more diverse options available to the courts, and innovation in the prevention of addiction in the first place. There's a gap in the data available on care experienced young people within addiction services and the judicial system. Collecting this data using the National Drug Treatment Reporting System could be further explored to allow for more targeted responses and allocation of resources. One of the main issues seen by EPIC advocates is the lack of appropriate detox and rehabilitation services for young people in care. While services like this for young people in general are limited, the services that exist are not appropriate or not always appropriate to the needs of care experienced young people. In the absence of these services, special care is being relied upon as a detox service, which puts further pressure on already stretched resources. Similarly, with the absence of appropriate diversion options for young people engaged in drug activity, the system can turn to Oireachtas, undermining its position as the option of last resort. Young people with care experience can have a dual diagnosis, which means that they may have a moderate to severe mental illness at the same time as a substance use disorder. Treatment options must address both. There are currently very limited services for children and young people experiencing dual diagnosis, particularly outside of Dublin. There's a need for bespoke drug, detox and rehabilitation services designed specifically to meet the needs of care-experienced children and young people. There's also a need for simple drug information sessions, relapse prevention and creative methodologies to explore substance misuse in an informal way. Counselling may not be appropriate for care-experienced young people at a particular instance, as they may not feel able to talk about their experiences and may respond better to youth work methodologies. If I could talk for 1 minute just about prevention. Prevention it can begin within education, both where key adults and professionals, the children and young people themselves, need greater awareness of the types of drugs available, the potential effects and the risks associated with their use. This knowledge can help professionals to offer support and empower young people to make informed choices and seek help early. Finally, just to draw the committee's attention to upstream services. This is often talked about in the context of preventing homelessness, particularly youth homelessness. There's the Geelong project, which was pioneered in Australia, and a related project is now seeing success across the water in Wales. This is actually something that has been recommended by a subgroup working in the Ireland's youth homelessness strategy, and it is being examined but hasn't been progressed. And I think that's something the committee might look at as a mechanism for getting in early to work where in situations where there's a need for support for families who are finding themselves in conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Ms Fiona Kearney to give your opening statement on behalf of Family Base.
Yeah. Hi everybody, and thanks for having Family Base here today. Our colleagues from Kinship Care Ireland will go in a bit more into detail in terms of the statistics and the data that we have available to us on Kinship Care. We're going to really, I suppose our opening statement is about our experience, I suppose, in the service working with children, young people and families in Kinship Care arrangements, and particularly in the context of children experiencing hidden harm. I suppose just to say a little bit about our service, we're a community-based organisation providing services in Ballyfermot and Cherry Orchard. We operate an integrated model of practice. I suppose what this means is, like, we call it a one-stop shop, but there's a range of services under one roof that are easily accessible for children, young people and families. So we have like early years and after schools, youth work programmes, arts programmes, intensive family support, counselling, parenting programmes. We're very lucky, we realise that we have all these services under one roof. We aren't just under one roof but very separated. We're integrated in that there's one pathway into the service, and I suppose a child can enter but their whole family can get support. I suppose I talk about that because in a way that's what has worked for us as a model in terms of supporting families when there is parental addiction and where the children are impacted, and I suppose we would call that intensive support. We do provide kind of universal provision where, you know, you can drop into your late night Friday night or your arts kind of in the studio and use the studio, but for some families they need something different. They need more than just a youth work intervention. They need more than just a counselling session. They need something that's flexible, that responds to what they're asking for. So I suppose we really see this for children who are affected by, I suppose, impacted by hidden harm. So I suppose most people will have heard of the term hidden harm in this committee, but it is, I suppose, the experience of children living with and affected by parental problem, alcohol and other drug use. I suppose that term has tried to capture two features really, is that hidden because often the children aren't known to services, and that's because of a massive fear, as we know, and we know this even in kinship care arrangements. There's a huge fear of reaching out to statutory services because what will TUSLA say if they know that, you know, the children are living with their mammy and their mammy's using drugs. So these children are often hidden and doubly disadvantaged because they're not getting access to a lot of services that are available. And we need to say not all families, but some children do experience harm when they're living in these situations. We've lots of research here now, I suppose, in terms of maybe the impact socially, physically, emotionally and developmentally for children impacted. I suppose the protective factors are often if we have one parent who doesn't use substances in a, I suppose, chaotic way at home, usually that is a huge protective factor for children. A good educational experience, if a child is getting support, all of these things support children. So it's over 20 years, nearly 22 years since the UK started looking at some of this stuff, and they published their Hidden Harm report. It was a massive seminal report in terms of looking at the needs of children, and this was different because I suppose for years within Addiction Service we do focus, and rightly so, on the person who presents for support. Then we start in the family support and the National Family Support Agency will be looking at how do we support family members and that, but children have often been missing from the picture. And even in the last national drug strategy, you know, we had a very small line in relation to families, and one of our big pieces, we really need to highlight children in policy and the impact. For us, the greatest prevention is working with children. So that's over 20 years ago. Yes, that report highlighted some of the impacts on children and started to gather the research in terms of what can happen for children when they're in homes where there's massive addiction and the impact it has on them. But even at that stage, over 22 years ago, kinship care was recognised as one of the vital supports for children, and it was recognised as probably one of the things that was holding the system up at the time, and hidden as well, because it was so many grandparents, aunts, older sisters, older brothers who were providing care for children. I suppose in the Irish context in 2013 we start talking about hidden harm ourselves, and TUSLA and the HSE got together and, you know, we developed the Hidden Harm project, and that led to the production or the publication in 2019 of our Hidden Harm strategic statement and the practice guide, Seeing Through Hidden Harm to Brighter Futures. And again, we had a big focus there on kinship care. I don't think we're calling it kinship care, but we're talking about family involvement, we're talking about family support, we're talking about the role of extended families, and we've been talking about that for a long time, but I don't think we're really giving it its value, its focus. I think we need to just start naming kinship care in policy. I suppose from family base, in the support that we provide to children and young people and families with kinship care arrangements, it's often grandparents, aunts, older siblings who are providing this care. I suppose the situation can occur by consent sometimes between the parent and the extended family, and they come up with these arrangements themselves, or it can happen by recommendation of TUSLA through the private arrangement. The private arrangement can be challenging because it can be unclear, it can be unsupported at times. I suppose the formal way for kinship care arrangements is through the formal foster care arrangement, and the informal kinship care, you know, there's so much value in the informal kinship care. However, long term, without supports, it's very challenging for families. That is what we would see. There are challenges economically, housing challenges, educational challenges, psychological challenges, and I suppose for us it's that until we recognise this living arrangement as something that's providing a huge service to the state and to children and families, we're not going to be able to follow that with services, supports and resources. So
to stop her a minute over at the moment, but I promise.
Oh, am I?
I know.
Can I do my recommendations in 10 seconds?
I promise you this won't be the last one you'll be talking.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, this won't be the last one
I talk a lot. Sorry about that.
No, it was great. Thank you. Yeah. So Fiona, thank you. I'm now inviting Miss Laura Dunleavy to give your own mistake. No. So who's now? Sorry. Gary Broderick from Sale. You're up. Sorry, Gary. I was going to skip over you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Radine Dunn is here with me, our Head of Services. Thank you for inviting us to this important session. We welcome the committee's sustained attention to the lived realities of families and communities most impacted, and we appreciate the compassionate tone set in your opening statement at last week's session, especially the emphasis on dignity, partnership and the crucial need to listen to the voices of service users and frontline practitioners. Today, we here at SAIL are representatives of SAIL, frontline women's addiction service rooted in the North Inner City. Every day we encounter the strength and resilience of women, mothers, grandmothers, sisters and kinship carers who provide stability, care and hope to families affected by drug use, often in the shadow of poverty, violence and exclusion. SAIL's model reflects the care and complexity required by these families. Our integrated supports are practical and holistic. We provide a creche for early years development so mothers, grandmothers or other kin can access treatment and support with peace of mind. We offer a full-time trauma-informed social worker to advocate for women and children and facilitate mother and baby groups that break isolation and build community. For example, we provide a mother and baby programme with HSE's Beug team from the North Inner City. Davina, our domestic violence team, ensures women access help in ways that are safe, confidential and non-judgmental, challenging the silos that can keep addiction and domestic abuse apart in the system. We also support women whose children are being cared for by kin, assisting them with the grief and shame they experience, as well as building their commitment and support for this new family arrangement. The Hidden Harm Framework, as we've heard, is our national approach to protecting children impacted by parental drug use and has helped social workers recognise that harm can be present even where it is less visible, and has supported important collaboration between child welfare, addiction and mental health services. However, we ask the committee to examine the limitations of hidden harm more keenly. Literature warns us of the gendered nature of its implementation. In practice, it can intensify scrutiny and blame directed at mothers while under-engaging fathers. The work of Whitaker et al. Ask what's hidden in hidden harm, along with the legal work of Rona Epstein in the Howard League working papers, act as starting points for our own thinking on this issue. Hidden harm frameworks can sometimes overlook the influence of structural factors such as poverty, racism, community violence, and the stigmatising attitudes of professionals, each of which can deepen disadvantage and further marginalise families who are already vulnerable. This too can be mirrored in short-term imprisonment of mothers in Ireland, which regularly results in abrupt disruptions to children's lives, with children typically placed in kinship care. Research by the Irish Penal Reform Trust and international studies highlight that maternal imprisonment is especially destabilising because mothers are most often primary caregivers. This sudden separation can result in children experiencing grief, anxiety, trauma and disrupted attachment. Kinship care, while often the preferred alternative to state care, can still be fraught with uncertainty, financial strain and emotional upheaval for both children and their relatives, particularly when placements are made hastily or without adequate support. The children's human rights, especially their right to family life and to be cared for by their parents, as guaranteed by Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights and Article 9 of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, are often put at risk. The Irish system could be criticised for inadequately considering the child's best interests in sentencing decisions for mothers, and for not providing consistent policy measures or supports that could safeguard these rights when short prison sentences break up family life. Indeed, Rona Epstein argues that courts are legally required to balance the needs of the child against the seriousness of the offence. Therefore, as you reflect on improvements needed at the intersection of kinship care, family support and drug policy, we respectfully request that the committee recognise and resource the practical community-rooted family supports like those offered by SAIL and by kinship carers across the country. Mandate more robust, gender-sensitive and anti-poverty approaches to both research and practice, including a review of hidden harm and professional training in trauma and implicit bias. To examine if this is within your remit, the sentencing of mothers and the impact of sentencing on children, and meaningfully involve service users and people with living and lived experience. We would like to commend the invaluable advocacy and expertise represented in the room today, our friends and partners at EPIC, supporting children and young people in care, Fiona Carney, Laura Dunleavy and Jacqueline Wilson, and all the wonderful work that they do. Thank you once again to the committee for this invitation and for your commitment to evidence, partnership and listening to families whose lives and futures are most affected by policies. We look forward to your questions and working together for progressive and inclusive change.
Thank you, Gary. I now wish to invite Ms Laura Dunleavy to give your opening statement on behalf of Kinship Care Ireland. Very welcome.
We welcome the invitation to speak today on behalf of Troy's Kinship Care Ireland programme. Founded in 2020 by kinship carer Katrina Naguris, our mission is to promote the recognition, rights and entitlements of children, young people and families in kinship care. Kinship care arises, as everyone in the room knows, when children cannot live with their birth parents and are instead raised by relatives or close family friends. This care keeps children connected to their families and familiar network and keeps children out of state care. Approximately 10 to 12,000 children in Ireland are being raised in kinship care, many due to parental addiction. Kinship carers, often grandparents but other relatives and family friends too, provide vital stability for children but face financial hardship, legal insecurity and limited access to supports despite preventing many children from entering formal state care. If the 10 to 12,000 children in kinship care were to enter state residential care in the morning, it would cost the state more than €3.6 billion annually. If they were to access the lower rate of foster care allowance, it would cost the state €249 million. What is currently happening by comparison, in 2024, just 2,508 guardians payments were being paid to an estimated 1/4 of kinship families, equating to just €29 million. That rings through with the statistics on our phone line, where in 2024, just 12% of our callers were in receipt of that vital support on their initial contact with us. Advocacy and support from Kinship Care Ireland and basic information brought that up to 32%, but still a huge amount without. And in half one of this year, just 10%, brought to 26% with advocacy. Despite this vital role, informal kinship carers remain largely invisible in official data. Private family arrangements are not captured by TUSLA, and kinship care is not recorded within the census, distorting our sense of the true scale. Between 2023 and half one of 2025, Kinship Care Ireland's phone line data show that parental addiction was the leading pathway into kinship care, ranging from 40% to 50% of our callers any given year, with 9 to 15% involving dual parental addiction. I'm joined by Anna here today, who, if time allows, would like to answer any questions that you might have in relation to her previously provided voice message, in relation to her lived experience and her knowledge. Another kinship carer who we had intended to invite today has tragically lost her adult child since the time of this invite in July. She continues to care for her grandchild while grieving. Without adequate supports, this responsibility deepens her burden, forcing her to hold the pain of loss and the demands of caregiving in the same breath. This reflects the hidden struggles of many kinship carers and highlights systemic failures in supporting families affected by substance misuse, failures that we have an opportunity to address here in the Oireachtas. From my own social care experience, the reason I applied for this role was not from a love of public speaking, I can assure you, but was because I grew disheartened and heartbroken to attend, after 11 years, countless funerals of young adults, parents, children and babies whose lives were lost due to the impact of addiction, deaths that could have been prevented if our systems worked differently. Deaths of mothers, fathers, sons and daughters and young people who had potential and entire lives ahead of them if they had been given the opportunities, choices and similar supports to their peers in a different catchment area. The Department of Children, Disability and Equality have begun vital work to support kinship families and address policy gaps, but the department cannot do this work alone, and the needs of kinship span across departments in relation to housing, health, education, welfare and justice. To truly protect children in kinship care, we need a whole-of-government response. Tuair's Kinship Care Ireland programme calls on the committee to demand cross-departmental responses to support kinship families. This includes providing a kinship care allowance equal to foster parents and guaranteeing child and welfare supports with unfair means testing, and removing the criteria that you must evidence parental abandonment to access this basic payment, which is not in line with parental rights, a child's rights to a relationship with their parent, and is in contrast to what's in line with the foster care allowance, where children are supported rightfully to sustain that parental relationship. Families need secure housing and legal recognition through special guardianship orders with faster, low-cost processes. Children and carers must have access to mental health, therapeutic, educational and healthcare supports. Aftercare should be extended for young people with kinship care experiences, and kinship carers should receive training, respite, counselling and social care when needed, as well as access to in-person peer supports. Finally, integrated family recovery pathways linking addiction and child and family supports must be developed, alongside stronger national data collection on kinship care. In conclusion, kinship carers are a critical yet under-supported pillar of Ireland's response to addiction-related family breakdown. By formally recognising and resourcing kinship families, the Oireachtas can reduce reliance on formal state care, support recovery and family resilience, safeguard the well-being of children and address intergenerational cycles of trauma and addiction. Kinship families are relied upon to break cycles of addiction. They cannot do it alone, nor should they have to. And if I have a few more moments to outline a few more quotes in relation to the impact of a lack of guardianship, kinship carers are entrusted with a child's full-time caring role, but often not supported with the legal status to fulfil this caring responsibility without challenges. A quote, "I'm stuck in the middle with this medical consent issue and about to be closed off to Tusla. She needs counselling." Another, "The baby was born with a heart condition. Not only was I terrified about that when she came to me, but also terrified that if I needed to bring her to the hospital in the middle of the night, that they may not allow me in without a parent present, which I couldn't guarantee. I was holding my breath for a year." Another, "I was terrified to apply for any sort of financial support until I had waited the year to apply for guardianship. I couldn't change over the child benefit. What if it caused conflict and the child was taken away from me and back to the situation? The emotional toll of navigating addiction, balancing love and worry for their adult child with the need to protect their grandchild is profound. At times, managing situations of extremely challenging behaviour from parents or facing death and a fear of death threats relating to drug intimidation and violence. Apologies. Kinship.
Yeah, no problem. We want to bring Anna in also. But Laura, before we do, can we just extend the deepest sympathies of everybody on the committee to the person you spoke about, the contribution? It's incredibly sad. Anna, would you like to? We think there was a statement sent through for yourself. Would you like to say anything? Maybe we can come back to it too.
I know. I came into kinship care. My daughter has substance use issues. A lot worse than I realised. And one Saturday, we were dropping our grandson back. He had come to us every weekend since he was born for a sleepover. And she just said, "Mum, I can't do it anymore. I can't do this." And asked us to take him for a couple of months so she could go to rehab. Those couple of months didn't happen. She didn't go to rehab, and my grandson is with us 9.5 years later. I do have to say, though, she is now in recovery, but recovery doesn't mean she's better. Recovery just means she's not using substances. She has a lot of mental health issues and she has additional needs. So my grandson stays with us. He will never go back to his mum, but with recovery there's always the fear of relapse. My daughter, was her substance of choice, if you want to say, was heroin and crack cocaine. She ended up on the streets here in Dublin. There were services available to her. Unfortunately, there were services that weren't available to her, especially housing or anything, because she was from Meath and not from Dublin, so she couldn't access hostels or anything like that. My grandson had witnessed some trauma, thankfully not too much, but because of that trauma, he had issues. He had anger issues, he had, trust issues, he had all of that. And we had to put him into counselling and we had to pay for it ourselves. I unfortunately can't work due to a disability, and it was my husband's wages that was paying for it because we weren't getting guardian's payment. We were getting no payment. My daughter was still accessing children's allowance. So we weren't getting anything. When my grandson came to us, he was actually sleeping in bed with me because we didn't have a bed for him. So my husband had to sleep in the junk room with a single bed and all our worldly belongings in the room. And there was no, that was in 2016, there was no Kinship Care Ireland, there was nothing. I didn't know where to go. I was afraid to ring Tusla because, what if I ring Tusla and they don't think I'm suitable to look after my grandson? Where does he go then? Does he go into care? So there was the fear of that. And we didn't know anything. There was nowhere to go. The only advice and thing I got was from a kinship care group in England, Kinfest it's called, or Kinship, sorry. So I had some kind of an idea. I didn't know what kinship care was. I'd never heard of the word. I was just looking after my grandson. So I realised it was actually, there was more than me doing it. So I kind of reached out and I applied for guardian's payment. So a year and a half after he came to us, we got it, and we were able to do up the spare room and give him a room of his own. You know, he picked the things to go into it, and that meant such a lot. But if we didn't have the guardian's payment, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And like, my husband's working, but he's paying all the bills and whatever, and I'm lucky in that my husband is still working. I'm a young grandparent, but there are grandparents that aren't in my situation, that are 10, 15, 20 years older, that aren't working. There are 2 pensioners, and they're not getting any payment, and they're bringing up 1, 2, 3, and sometimes 4 young children that grow into teenagers that need lots of things, but they can't provide them.
Anna, I'm going to stop you just for a moment, where I promise everyone's voice will be heard several times during this, and anyone who hasn't spoken, you will get an opportunity. But thank you so much for sharing your lived experience with us. I'm sure members are going to have some questions as well. So I'm going to pass over to members. We have 5 minutes for, no, there's 7 minutes we're doing for the first round. I'm going to ask just to leave some time for responses to questions at the end. Senator Rowan, you were first.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for your presentations. I'm a huge supporter of each group's work in here, and I'm very appreciative of it. And just to join with the Chair in acknowledging the death of that woman's daughter and that child's mother, and to extend our sympathies. It shows the I suppose the complexions of life in a way for many families. And I think to caveat before even asking any questions is that there's so many families, you know, that are raising kids who will continue to struggle with substance use while continuing to raise their children, and it's not always, I suppose, necessary as well to remove children from households. And I think just to acknowledge that there's so many different circumstances, so many different assessments to be made at different points of the journey for people. So to kind of keep in mind all of those families and kind of figure out how can we support families at each stage of that, whether that's keeping the family together, or if it means kinship care, or in some cases obviously care, that we make sure that the adequate supports are there for each part of that. I think I'm thinking, and I might just ask my questions first, and if they can note them and come back in instead of me coming back and forth. So I'm thinking maybe in relation to family base, I've heard lots of positive stuff about the building safer communities within Cherry Orchard. And I'm not sure how much you can speak to that work that happened, the pilot programme with DCC. But I also imagine in the stuff that I hear about it, I think of it as a hugely preventative piece as well. So obviously supporting people that are in obviously difficult circumstances, but also that prevention of piece in terms of people's homes, people's families, and maybe if you can, to maybe say a few words on that and the role that has played for, and I suppose the necessity for something like that to continue in Cherry Orchard. The other question I have is, it's probably even for the department, right? But I do think it's worth, or it's for TUSLA, but you know, I have become in way too many situations an advocate in social work spaces, and I'm not a social worker with them expertise, but I keep ending up in that space supporting people because parents don't have access to a social worker. So even if they get to the point where family reunification is the obvious next step, they find huge barriers within that family reunification piece. And I'm wondering if maybe Epic Sale, especially maybe Epic and Sale on this one in relation to that balance, because in some of the meetings that I've sat in, especially in relation to fathers, and in some cases the mother has already potentially passed away or is in prison and the father looks for reunification. And there seems to be a general sense sometimes, oh, well, the kids are settled where they are in the foster placement, and, you know, or the kids are really happy where they are. And sometimes I feel that that is being presented in a children's rights framework, that the child's preference because they feel settled there is somehow children's rights, but actually the family reunification piece or the child's right to relationship piece. So I'm just wondering, on an organisational level, how do we engage with that and manage that, and is that coming up much? The other question I have is for kinship care. Obviously, the proof of parental abandonment piece is so problematic, so shaming. Plenty of parents are still involved in one's life but may not be able to give the everyday care piece. So if maybe we can reiterate why it's so important to address that, and also what I'm wondering is a sibling's right to relationship, because what I've found in a lot of support is that sometimes, for instance, say if you have a father who is in addiction potentially, and his siblings or his children in his most recent relationship is in their children end up in kinship care, but that there's other siblings from previous relationships, and that sibling relationship is not being facilitated, or the child's right to relationship in regards to siblings is not kind of being prioritised in any shape or form to make sure that those sibling ties remain intact. One young man that I worked with in the prison for a long time, who came through the care system, he spoke as one of the most traumatising things for him was being split from his siblings, and not having that bond and connection to be able to mind each other after such traumatic experiences. So if maybe we can speak to how do we make sure and safeguard siblings from previous or additional relationships in the family unit. Thank you.
Anyone like to go first?
I would like to start with Fiona. You asked the question. So I suppose the building safer communities in Cherry Orchard. Look, it's not complicated. It's as simple as the rest of the stuff. It's a case management model based on what the needs of that person are presenting. And that's exactly how we do our work, I suppose, our intensive family support work. And I suppose it's very vulnerable families who DCC often can't engage with, or they're not managing. They would say that the families won't engage with them, which is sometimes the case because they're fearful of the engagement at times. But it's just what we've done is, and we've had it's a new pilot. It's been very successful. There's actually a kinship care arrangement in one of them families as well. So look, it's just going out and meeting families. There might be a housing issue. There usually is a housing. There's often an antisocial behaviour issue. There's a rent arrears issue. And we do all of the things that we do at all families. We sit down and we say, what's going on? How can we practically help with that? But the big difference with this is we have the local authority on board, so at a systems level they're willing to be flexible. Okay, so that means that we have identified with the local authority a number of families where some is that the children have gone into care, and the man might be in a house and she doesn't feel safe there, or she's in the community and she wants to move somewhere else, but that's a long protracted process, but we do it quite quickly. The council, I suppose, you tried to say there's a benefit from them. They're getting a house back that might have more rooms. The mother feels safer. There was another domestic violence case where we wanted apartment accommodation, but we could move quicker. I suppose just how that relates to all of this work, Lynn, and I'm just really interested in your piece around not every family. I suppose 90% of the families we work with where there is parental addiction, we're working, and I will say, with mostly mothers, okay, in their home, and then mothers are caring for their children, and rightly so. They're doing a phenomenal job against all the odds, poverty, stigma, fear, all of these pieces, and violence as well. So like the majority of the families, it's an outreach model. It's in their homes, it's practical support, it's food poverty support, it's fuel poverty support, it's support to get to addiction services, mental health services, but it's also very practical support for their children, one-to-one spaces for them children, so that they can be validated, because it is challenging, but most children want to live at home. That's usually the experience. They want to stay at home. Then there are a number of families where grannies step in, aunties step in. But what I would say about kinship care arrangements is they need to be movable and fluid, because it doesn't last, and that's why they're so valuable, is that if mammy goes and if it gets access to treatment, or she is in a better position, or something changes with her partner or something like that, then it is okay for her children to live at home. And that's the value of kinship care, because it moves much quicker. And then there are a small, tiny number who do need the state care piece. But the vast majority are at home. And I'd say the vast majority are home with their mothers. And that doesn't mean that their granny, their auntie and all them people aren't wrapped around that family, because they usually are as well. And they're the greatest eyes around the family as well, and supporting them. So I don't know if that answers it, but try to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we should have a second round of questions as well.
Yeah, if I do have to leave, I am on the defamation bill, so apologies. I will obviously be in and out. Yeah.
Deputy Marie Sherlock.
And look, I want to thank all the organisations here today, and I think, Anna, to you in particular, was really powerful. I suppose your contribution today, so thank you. I'm familiar with the work of SAIL and EPIC, but great to have Kinship Care Ireland and Family Base here as well today. I suppose when we, I often think with the word kinship, we're all familiar with the word next of kin, and I think yet so few people out there actually understand what kinship means. We understand what it means informally, but I think in terms of that phrase, and obviously it's reflected in then the huge lack of resources and supports formally from the state. Like when I see here the very poor take-up of the guardianship payment, it's horrendous to think the hoops that people have to go through to prove that a parent has that there is a parent abandonment is in terms of the stigma. And I'm so struck by what Anna said about that fear and concern about, will you qualify, will you be deemed eligible, or capable of looking after your grandchild. I suppose the question, just a few questions, I suppose, just in terms of the data piece and understanding how much the formal and informal caring arrangements out there, because I think it's a point made that we don't have a good sense. How would we better understand, though, the number of kinship carers out there? Like, is it the role for TUSLA, or is it for somebody else? And not that data should be our primary focus here, but I suppose it's important in the context of just understanding how we better support and make that powerful argument that it is happening on quite a significant scale. So I don't know which organisation wants to point to that, but I just think the data collection piece is difficult, and I'd just like to hear your thoughts on how that can be done and who should be doing it.
Would I speak to the proof of parental abandonment question first?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then come on. I suppose that piece alone, the language, the term abandonment, is just simply so damaging. No parent wakes up in the morning and decides to leave. There's always an underlying circumstance that has led to that. I have spoken with a young kinship carer who was caring for her teenage siblings, and she received a letter asking her to prove evidence that her father abandoned her. It's just so wrong to receive that type of letter. And that's not, the social welfare payment that is there, and we've spoken to the deciding officers. They have a set of operational guidelines that they have to satisfy. We need that payment completely changed. We would love to see a kinship-specific payment. And Anna kindly did a booklet, which you all have, capturing the insights from 114 kinship carers in a Facebook group that she coordinates. And one of them said, please amend the rules for eligibility to the guardian's payment allowance to one rule, that this child or these children need the full-time care of this person. And that would make lives a lot easier and would ensure that kinship carers have the time that they need to invest into supporting a child to heal through trauma, in relation to supporting their adult child, or in relation to navigating their own grief. At the moment, what we're seeing is kinship carers are asked questions in relation to any sort of access, whether it's unsupervised, if there's any receipt of maintenance, and all of those answers collate together to evidence whether there is or is not parental abandonment. I hope that answers some of what you were asking, Senator Lynn. And then in relation to the data prevalence and trying to capture, like what we've said, the Department of Children are working with TUSLA on that, and they do hope to have a stat in relation to private family arrangements by the close of this year, in relation to private family arrangements receiving a TUSLA payment and private family arrangements that are not. And that would help, that would give us a good place to start. We have been trying to get some sort of data from the census, and I know the Department of Children are working on that. It's an estimated 1% of population, so we're working from that overseas kind of data. In relation to the piece around back to the parental abandonment piece. When a parent is returning home from treatment, sometimes that parent is moving back into their mum or dad's home, and we have seen guardians' payments removed in that process because a parent might have applied for a social welfare payment after coming out of prison or returning home after a period in treatment, and their parent wanting to support them to not have to access homeless services, and that means that the guardian's payment is stopped. So there's lots of barriers, lots of glass ceilings and lots of hoops to jump through that rob kinship carers of their time, which is needed to sustain the role and that caring piece. Is there anything you wanted to add, Damien, there?
No, just that really that it's a bespoke payment for kinship care. It's trying to fit, as we say, a square peg into a round hole. When you're trying to use the guardian's payment to address kinship care, it's not an adequate payment, and you don't even have the differential payment between an under 12 and an over 12. And you know the cost increases for an over 12 and the extra cost to go in with that. So all of these things that we're talking about are the lack of support for kinship care, and it's only because we don't use the term enough, and everything you've talked about, we don't even know the extent of the problem that we have. But if I may also just to speak to Lynn's point about the family and the siblings' right to engage. Yesterday in Kinship Care Day, we heard the heartbreaking testimony of a grandmother who had only the resources to take one of her grandchildren into the care. What a choice to have to make. And she heartbroken. Speaking about it was heartbreaking. And it's to do with so many things that the payment wasn't enough to support both children. She has all the things that Fiona just talked about, the lack of support for housing, mental health supports, the needs of her child, the extra needs of the grandchild, the needs of her daughter that was in addiction. So all of those things are hugely important. And yes, the goal should be, can you support the family to remain together? What supports are in there? And then the pathways along well, if they're not, the next choice is kinship care. How do you support that? How do you keep the families together? How do you keep that connection? Because what we've learned is that the adverse effects of a child go right into adulthood. And if I've been disconnected from my siblings, and you hear adults talk about that now, and we're having cases of institutional care where adults are talking about the impact of being separated from their siblings. And we are not dealing with that now. And now is our chance to say, well, how do we do it? How do we put supports into kinship care?
Chair, I'm conscious, obviously I'm out of time, but I do want to ask a question, and it can be answered later, but it's just important to understand in terms of that health and education piece, right? And I think it's well set out here about the lack of access and the lack of recognition by the health service of those in kinship arrangements, or particularly in informal kinship arrangements. And I just want to understand, has that changed? How much has that changed much over the past 20 years? Particularly, I'm thinking of GDPR and all that now, because the extent to which health services show a degree of recognition, of flexibility, of humanity towards families who are in these situations, and actually allow, whether it's the grandparent or an aunt or an uncle looking after the child, that access, how that has changed, I suppose, and because I suppose that's something, I'm health spokesperson for my party, and I think that's something that a message needs to go to the health sector about how they can better respond and recognise families in these situations. Sorry, that's a long-winded question.
I'm conscious we are over time.
Yeah.
I'm also more conscious that we are here to learn and take in. So if you still want to answer that question. Please.
Yeah, and I suppose that points to the legal issue as well. So if you are kinship caring due to the loss of a parent when there has been bereavement, you can apply for guardianship from the time you step into the role. Otherwise, you have to wait 12 months. And that means the implication is on that child's access to health, whether that is a dentist appointment to get an antibiotic, or more significantly, mental health illness. We've spoken with children who weren't able to access the supports of CAMHS, Pieta House, when they were suicidal and had experienced overdoses because of that parental consent piece, and there's no social worker involved, so you have to go around in circles, and it could take 2 weeks before you get access, before a social work department can overwrite that if there hasn't been a social worker involved. That's the lived reality for at least 12 months for those kinship carers, which is an estimated 80% of our callers. And then also, when you look at the impact of adverse childhood experiences, we know the evidence is there that can lead to a higher prevalence of the need to access physical health supports, mental health supports, and the impact that has on children if we don't intervene early and wrap around that child and scaffold and support them to come through that trauma. And I suppose what we would love to see is the same prioritisation, same supports that is available to children in formal care, because we recognise that those adverse childhood experiences exist, and we know from a very cold perspective, from a financial return on investment, if we intervene early and support a child, that will come back to us. So I think that comes down to the medical piece, the prioritisation for assessments, for therapeutic support. We speak with families where maybe there has been a significant trauma, and in particular in cases of domestic homicide, where the perpetrator is accessing a prison sentence and they're holding the guardianship consent for that child to access therapeutic supports in relation to Valerie's law. So at every step you look at for kinship care, there is a hurdle, there is a closed door. In relation to going on into adulthood, Susie, that's the Department of Higher Education, but it's every piece, and we have given you a little briefing in relation to each department because it does intersect so many different areas. But thanks for that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. Deputy Tom Bravison.
I suppose I'd like to thank everybody for their very insightful presentations this morning in relation to this really, really important issue. Just listening to your contributions this morning, it seems to me that the kinship care and the work that kinship carers do is far more preferable than state care, and literally because one of the most important things anybody can give to a child is love, and if you're a family member, you're going to give that child the love. And I think it's really, really important work that you're doing, and whatever supports you need, you should be given those, and the carer should be given those, and whatever's there should be bolstered to I suppose enhance and maximise the effect of it. I do have a number of short few questions, and I suppose I'll direct it to EPIC because it stems from the presentation there. So under ways forward, you stated that and there are ways forward, improving services for those actively in addiction, and then you mentioned more diversion options available to the courts. Could you possibly expand on that? What do you mean by more diversion options? Or is there any particular suggestions in that regard? And then you go on further to say that there is a need for bespoke drug detox and rehabilitation services designed specifically to meet the needs of care experienced children. What does that in particular look like? And again, just like other speakers, I'd like to thank Anna for her very profound contribution today. Gramadit.
Yeah, so thanks for the questions. On the first one, on the court system, there are, and this goes to the Department of Justice and the options available to the courts when they're dealing with young people who are caught in addiction and perhaps veering into criminality. There are some within the justice bills that are, but they're not up and running or available to the courts. So those kind of things around diversion options in the justice system, rather than committing a young person to Oireachtas. So one of our concerns is that because there isn't necessarily the high-level supports sort of in between special care and Oireachtas, that perhaps should be part of our special care, alternative care system, that the courts could intervene and send to more supported environments. If those kind of options were open to the courts, more therapeutic options open to the courts, that perhaps we could have better outcomes for children in those circumstances. I will say, EPIC, we do have experience in this area, but we're not a drug rehab service or do that. We refer on, but what we do see in terms of alternative options for care experienced services designed for care experienced young people is that a lot of the services for young people that are out there are actually based around family intervention and based around counselling models. A lot of what the trauma that has led to addiction, that has contributed to their care experience, or their care experience has contributed to their addiction, they're not necessarily ready to go into counselling. What they're looking for is alternative ways of addressing the kind of crisis that they're in that might lead to counselling further down the road. But those services just aren't there, and if they are there, they're very rare. They're often innovations that happen by individuals rather than systemic services that are in position. And social workers will tell you that there aren't the services there for them to refer the young people in their charge to. And that's something we continue to see. I don't know if Fiona wants to add to that.
Yes, just follow up on 2 comments there. I suppose just in relation to the young people we meet perhaps through the likes of the special care units and in Ballydowd who have entered those services maybe because of a welfare issue going into special care, compounded by an addiction issue, and then a young person who has had a criminal conviction and enters Oireachtas with also an addiction issue, that many times those young people will say to us they're doing very well with dealing with their addiction issues while in those services because they're getting the relevant supports. However, their concern then is, where am I going beyond this? So therefore, they get a discharge from Oireachtas and they're going back into their local communities. They're talking about being extremely vulnerable to maybe gang-related matters or to persons in the community who will exploit them to whatever. Then in relation to young people within special care, it's about, well, I mean, that presents its own issues about obviously identifying placements beyond special care, but then again, where does that young person go? And again, the issues that they face if they're back into their community and don't have a suitable placement to support them around their ongoing concerns around their addiction issues. I suppose just it's really important to say that some of the young people we work with engage with the local community-based addiction services, and those services are very, very supportive and have often brought that young persons very successfully through their journey. The issue then for a young person with a care experience is that if you're on a care order and you need a residential placement, that's compounded by who's the authority overseeing that, where that child is in the care of TUSLA, but there's no residential placement that can actually have that kind of dual role about being the oversight as the statutory issue and also being there to support them with their addiction. So residential placements are probably some of the really needed services for these young people as well.
Sorry, Chair, just want to follow up on that. I suppose, do the courts, are you aware that the courts have the power to, like after somebody's, say, for example, sent to Oireachtas and they get out, the courts, they're functus officio, as I understand it, so they don't have any further role. So there's a gap there that needs to be looked at.
Absolutely, and I suppose the service that we provide to Oireachtas is that we provide advocacy support to all young persons in Oireachtas because they're in the care of the state. It's slightly different to other our other commitments with TUSLA, and absolutely that these young people are often going straight back home into their local communities. And whilst they may have some really supportive parental figures for them, there is that vulnerability of what they can then, what the community issues present for them. Then obviously young people who are leaving Oireachtas who are in the care of TUSLA. I mean, what we would be doing as advocates is advocating to the social work department responsible. Is it advisable that this young person is going back into that community whereby they're going to face, and should it be looked at as, and we don't want young people moving placements because that's a whole other issue, but it might be that we have to, we're saying, well look, something alternative may have to be sought for this young person, because we need to be listening to what they're saying as their vulnerabilities. They've been drug-free for the last year and a half, and we have to make sure that we do our maximum to make sure that they remain drug-free.
Could I just speak to a point that Lynn made earlier? I really appreciated the point you made about the continuum of substance use. And I, like yourself, find myself in social work spaces all the time advocating for a non-binary view of what that looks like. And oftentimes where we are is we speak about addiction full stop, and addiction is chaos, whereas we don't actually have the ability within our systemic spaces to look at a family's function within that, and how it is very possible, because we work with mothers every day, for a mother to provide good enough care to her child whilst using substances. And that's not said enough. It is an ideal situation. Of course, we would prefer that that woman didn't use substance, but we don't live in an ideal world. However, our state's response to women who use substances are often binary and punitive in nature. So just to exemplify that point, of our 11 children in our children's centre 3 years ago, 5 of them were moved into care and no family reunification was planned, because we know in our experience when the mother who is involved in substance use, once her child is removed into care, the chances of that child returning is limited, and the barriers put in place in terms of what she's expected to do is unreasonable. I have been in social work spaces where social workers have requested mother to be no longer on her methadone maintenance programme, when that methadone maintenance programme is maintaining her stability. And that very view shows a lack of understanding and insight into the continuum of recovery. So while we all accept that we are here to support people through their addiction, we have to accept that there is a continuum of recovery. And as you said, Anne, recovery is not about the absence or the presence of drugs. It's a whole other function. There's lots to consider, and we have to consider all of those things. As my colleague Gary said, when we look at hidden harm only through the lens of addiction, we're ignoring systemic issues like poverty, like mental health, like systemic barriers that women face all the time. So, yeah, thank you.
Eileen, thank you so much. Deputy Maura Devine.
Thanks everybody, and thanks for your presentations and your thoughtfulness for those that we need to be thoughtful for and care for. I guess it's a good time. It's International Kinship Care Week as well as World Mental Health Week as well. So, and all those things are all just so mixed up together. There's a few comments and questions, so forgive me if I kind of fly off in different directions. Some people who are involved in the the addiction and the help and whatever, and local groups or forums or whatever, they feel that we will invite the Minister into this arena, but because there's a timeline on the new National Drug Strategy, there's a feeling that it's already set in stone. So I wanted to just get your opinions and your views as to whether you feel your voices have been heard and will be heard, and that is there time for that to be heard, as opposed to something that seems to be, we're under pressure obviously to get this out, but people have a concern, I would say, that your voices need to be primary, and hopefully, in the last two sessions we've had, that we're going to be able to reflect that. But do you think that's adequate time for that to do? Because there's so much we could talk about forever, I guess. There was. I wanted to probably for us to ask the Minister O'Callaghan, Justice Minister, to response to one, the sentencing guidelines and the actual focus and kind of re-emphasis on what is best for that family when the woman, the mother, is getting sentenced, and is all that taken in, to refocus and re-emphasise that by him to the courts, because it's such a small area of incarceration, but it causes such an explosion of ripples all around. So I think that would be something we need to kind of focus on. The other one is, and then you've talked quite a lot about it, is the formalisation of the kinship care. It's just kind of floating around and nobody's tied it down, but we don't want to tie down. I suppose formalise it in some manner, but allow it to be flexible. Let's not go down the route of feckin' forms and did you tick this and did you do that and did you get this from that agency and that from the doctor and that from the paediatrician, all that sort of stuff. That they have all that information. We're in a digital age. It's got to be simpler, but certainly it has to be to the forefront and be included in every time we talk about care for kids. I don't know who would be able to answer this, but women seeking refuge, women in addiction seeking refuge, either themselves in addiction or running from addiction, and their children. I'm trying to get local authorities to give me a concrete answer as to, if I'm a woman in fear and I take my children. There's one recently went to the county next to us, Kildare, and they're refusing to house her, saying, no, you need to go back to get emergency accommodation in Dublin. But that's where the problem is. Okay, you talked a little bit about that. And by the way, sorry, deepest condolences to that mum who has lost her own daughter and continues to care for the child, Erdeshke Gareva Anam. So about that, I suppose, trying to get local authorities to be a bit more definite. I mean, this is an endemic problem in society. Violence, domestic violence is, and often the two are often go hand in hand. And it doesn't excuse the violence, but it is a factor in very vulnerable communities that I see. And like yourselves, we all become the social worker or people coming into us and not know where to go. But certainly, local authorities need to be addressed as to that. I've loads more, but I'll stop there. So thank you.
Would anybody in particular like to address? Yeah, Ryan.
Sorry, Gary. Just in relation to women seeking refuge, is that we have a very risk-averse view of women who are involved in substance use and their ability to seek refuge. We facilitate a domestic violence service called Davina, which looks at that intersectionality of women who use substances and are also survivors of domestic violence. And what we do know is that women who use substances are more likely to be involved in a domestically violent relationship, and yet they're absent from the strategy. We've named migrant women, we've named traveller women, we haven't named, explicitly named, women in addiction as a vulnerable cohort. Now, our ability for women to actually seek refuge, should they choose it, should they choose to actually seek refuge, has been very limited, and limited because of their addiction. And while addiction services, I understand that there are risks and there is safety planning and all of that. However, the addiction seems to be the absolute deterrent to women seeking refuge. And it's our view that that is completely contrary to her human rights to actually seek refuge. We have, in the last 3 years since Davina has been involved, we've managed to get 3 women into refuge, and that was with very creative narrative, to be honest with you, in relation to actually seeking and advocating for that woman. It's an issue we have to discuss while our own consciousness and our ability to speak about domestic violence is absolutely raised. We have to look at the worthy victim within that. And sometimes our women, the woman who is involved in substance use, is not having access to her victimhood. She is seen as an unprotected parent in the social work space, and she's seen as a problem and a risk in the domestic violence space.
And I think, if it's okay, that when if she decides to act in relation to the domestic violence, she's much more likely to enter into a problematic phase of substance use afterwards. And yet we don't actually support her in that, then therefore putting families more at risk. So we have to start thinking more creatively. And I do think that in relation to the National Drug Strategy, we've moved away from criminalising, but maybe we haven't moved away from an abstinence focus to our responses. And that we need to be a lot more comfortable with the fact that sometimes people will be using substances, but we can support and help them and keep families together. Keeping that unit together is the best before the kinship is necessary, but if we can keep them together, and that for me is also highlighted, and thank you for bringing us back to the sentencing guidelines, because I think it's utterly preposterous, the numbers of women in our prisons for small usually non-violent crimes, and very often crimes that have roots in domestic violence as well. And if we can think differently and more creatively and keep that woman in the community so that she can be supported as a mother, rather than putting her in prison and then she has to come back out, may have lost her home, may then not be able to bring children back together, or be brought back into one woman that we worked with, her children have been in care. She's ready to take them back, but has a 1-bedroom apartment and 3 children, so she can't bring them back. And our housing situation is that has been in that limbo for a lengthy period of time. So all of that I believe need to think differently. And just one other element linked with families and the impact is if dad goes to prison, there is certainly in the north end of the city a social obligation on the partner to be supporting him while he's in prison, and yet finances has halved because he's now in prison, and so all that goes with that for different families. So all of this is alongside the kinship care issue, but maybe just going back another little step to say that, again, if we start moving away from the abstinence focus and we start thinking about belonging and connection and that much kind of broader sense of the intersectionality of all the issues that come in when you have addiction, then particularly for the young people, and when we're looking for young people programs, instead of having the focus on the drug use, having the focus on that young person and what they need, and that kind of the intersectionality of all their issues.
The belonging,
Belonging is so important, and if you can offer people that, then I believe that we will move an awful lot better and more forward in helping them process the trauma. And with that, I mean, there was a great reminder of connection to ACEs, but increasingly in the literature we're beginning to ask, can we have extended ACEs, please? Because childhood tends to go on that little bit longer. You know, we know now more than we did before, but it's also more than those 10 things listed in the ACEs that people are experiencing.
Okay. I'm conscious Deputy Devine also asked about the voice of kinship carers in the National Drug Strategy, presumably either previous one or in the formation of this one. Do you want to ask that question? Anyone want to refer to that question?
In relation to kinship care, it's often the voice that's left on the sidelines and isn't involved in any of those spaces, so we would always advocate to have that voice central. I just want to follow up, and firstly just to echo everything that Gary and Radine have just said there. In relation to the formalisation piece of kinship care, like often it's not a social work response that's needed or necessary, and often families are closed off to social work when the child protection element is removed, or other families aren't open with social work to begin with. What we're looking for is the resourcing of a support pathway that when a family does step up during a crisis, during a really difficult time, that they're supported with that wraparound support and that support is resourced. At the moment, you know, that lack of awareness piece, we are a team of 2 full-time and 1 part-time worker in our programme in Troir, and we would love to see that society know and understand and are aware of kinship care. So to have that awareness is a first point, and then to look at that pathway to support. I suppose that was just in relation to that formalisation piece. And often families, in relation to the relative foster care assessment, a grandparent, like Anna has said, might have to step up for 1, 2, 3 plus children, and they're in a 1 or 2 bed apartment. They're not going to pass the relative foster care assessment. Sometimes families aren't informed about that being an option, and once they take on the care, that case is closed off, so that option isn't even on the agenda. But other families do get that information and they say, I don't want to go through the formalisation of my care for my grandchild or my niece or my nephew or whoever it might be. So that's the lived reality. So we need to look at, yes, supporting, and yes, having some level of assessment to ensure a family is supported, but that there's that pathway of support and that there's a return point of contact if needed.
Just very briefly, Damon, I need to bring...
It's just because it doesn't need to be formalised to be supported, and it's the informal, and as you mentioned, Maria, it's that ability to adapt and be flexible in situations, but it does need support for both the parent that's child has gone into kinship care and the kinship carer, because there's often tensions as well around how do I parent, in the case, and those. So there's a lot more supports that can be offered to the parent and to the family, if the resources are there to give it.
Thank you, folks. Deputy Graves.
Look, I just want to start by saying how valuable it is to our work to have you all here today, and particularly detailed presentations. We would have loads of questions to ask, but a lot of them, the answers are in there already, so, that's brilliant for us all. I do want to acknowledge the importance of the role that kinship plays in keeping the families together and providing the essential care, that's needed for the children who suffer from hidden harm. And I want to thank you, Anna, for sharing your story with it. I was listening to it and I was thinking back to, kind of a famous documentary of the 1990s, where it's called They Call Me Mammy. I don't know if many of you remember it or not, but it was about the grannies in Dublin looking after their grandkids during the worst times of addiction and of course the HIV crisis. And here we are 35 years later, and things really haven't changed dramatically, and the services haven't changed. So thanks for that. And we're still waiting for kinship to get proper recognition and support, And also, I've been reading through the Kinship Care Ireland presentation, the 10 to 12,000 children at a cost saving to the state. And this week, we're in a week of the budget, and what was given to the services? Nothing, And not only that, the grants for the task forces has been cut by 25%. Quite cynically, they were increased last year in advance of the general election and down again this year, So, look, it's appalling, and what's happened, but we'll all continue to raise awareness. So what I'll do is, if you don't mind, I'll ask kind of a couple of questions of all of you so you have more time to respond than me talking all the time. I was with Family Base this week and saw firsthand, the excellent service being provided there, and particularly the child-centred approach that you have. And if Fiona or Brendan, either of you, I don't mind, could expand on how Family Base would envisage tackling the causes and consequences of the intergenerational trauma, much of it caused by addiction, drug-related intimidation and mental health issues, and how you'd see with dealing with that. I also visited Sale earlier on in the year, and it really struck me that the compassion and strength that the staff there had for the women who had journeyed long and hard to where they were. Recently, I was actually at a Council of Europe meeting, and I did raise the issue of how difficult it is for women to access services because of the fact that they're the ones that are the main people looking after their kids and the problems, and they're included in that. But if you could highlight what services are in place or what services and supports that are needed to facilitate children moving back in with their mothers and their immediate family, and I realise this is difficult, and it can be difficult for all concerned. But fear, worry, and anxiety, and how that could be approached. And then finally, a question to Laura. You're calling on the committee to demand cross-government support for kinship families. I think it's a great idea, and absolutely 100% support that. But what would you think that it'd look like, and which departments do you think that should do that work? That's it.
No more questions there. Thank you, Deputy
That's
Grace.
me 3 questions.
That was very good. Very good.
I'm giving loads of time for answers.
That's fantastic. Anybody want to come in? Yeah, I know one was asked for family.
Brendan. Well, I'll have a go.
I said either of you.
Causes and consequences and how a service can address them. I suppose from the sense I got was from your presentation or your walk around last week. So I suppose the intergenerational effects of substance misuse and trying to break that, I suppose, really starts. And we feel the earliest possible intervention is in the early years setting. So I suppose identifying very early speech and language, young people not developing or not meeting their general milestones along the way, and getting in and then being able to be in a very unique position we are to address them. So I suppose if with the proper resources in early years, like we can bring in speech and language therapists, we can bring in OT therapists as well for young people, so that when they start to engage in the education, that the frustrations or the internal frustrations are already addressed. So there's nothing worse than a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old that has loads of unintentional neglect, we'll call it, right? Because the damage is kind of done. There's no mammy that wants to neglect their child. There's no daddy that wants to neglect their children either. And they're not consciously doing it. It's just the effects or the adverse effects of addiction in their home. So if they're not able to communicate very well, or they've learned skills of communicating very differently to other young people, or their communication skills might be what we'd see as negative, and if they were 14 and 15 we'd call them antisocial, and then they're up before the courts before you know it. So if they're going to school at 4 and 5 they can't communicate frustrations, it's going to come out in, I suppose, behaviour. I suppose then, so that's the early years. And then I suppose we've identified a gap between early years and youth work as well. So we've developed our own after school, which is very intense support, so we can bridge that gap. So like early intervention at earlier stage or building relationships. We've already had at this the youth work committee that 10 is sometimes too late for the youth work intervention, that we need to be building relationships with young people when they're much younger, so that we can support and have them challenging conversations with them when they are 10. So when they're starting to be involved in criminality, when they are starting to, I suppose, experiment with drug use, starting off with smokes or smoking a joint or a few cans in the field, that them relationships are already built, and you have that one good adult, I suppose, through the whole life cycle of a young person into adulthood. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. I think we're talking about the journey of addiction and the journey of a recovery. There's also a journey of levels of interventions that go with that as well. So I think we have youth work, early years, family support, the role of the education system, the role of the council, the role of every other department, I suppose, that intertwines into a young person's life. So it's not a quick answer, Anne, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. Anybody like to expand, or anybody like to come in?
I just want to add the real quick thing about poverty. Like, you know, one of the greatest cures for everything is if we address poverty. So I suppose it's, for me, just in terms of recognition of these arrangements and all, I think it's just really important to add two things relating to this, but other questions. One is that I think we need to not formalise kinship care, but recognise it, because we have so many little children who are afraid to say what their arrangement is because there's so much fear. Don't tell the school that your auntie's moved into your mammy's house while your mammy's gone away, because it's all secret, it's all this. Don't tell them that your nanny's going in and collecting your ma's payment. And that creates this awful experience for children where my living arrangement isn't recognised, it's secret, it's wrong, all of that. And the other piece around recognising, we also need to remember that mammies and parents need a voice in kinship care as well. If a parent actually doesn't want the kinship care arrangement, they need to be able to have a say, because some parents have grown up in families where they've experienced that trauma themselves within that family unit, and they may not want their child to be there. So we need to listen to parents. I just wanted to add them in from a few conversations.
Okay, Roderick, you have your hand up there, Jonathan.
So, in trying to kind of just formulate services and supports that might be necessary, I think first and foremost, we're not dealing with mainstream in the sense that a lot of the time we've got kind of the extreme end of things, and if that's reunification, it means that there was a breakdown, that the children had to move out. So I think one of the things is that there needs to be patience with the family, and that means time. If we're talking about relationship building and giving people space, there's need for that patience within the system itself. This might take a while, and I think then we talk about trauma informed. I talk more about trauma and violence informed practicing, and that in the schools, amongst staff, that we're aware of what the impact that will have on children. And just how they might then be presenting, and that a transition back to mammy is great, but if mammy is distressed or whatever, and unfortunately we've named it, but in a lot of the families that we know in Sale, domestic violence is regularly present. It's huge, and then the system around the woman may not be that secure. There isn't safety. So it's really about looking to see where that safety might come in, but also that you can get out of practice of being a mammy. If your children are away, so it takes a while to get used to minding the kids again, giving over your time, giving over everything to the children. But even just simple things of how am I emotionally available for the children. So we found with our services in Sale, one of the most beautiful things is just to watch when you give mothers the support that then, this is what we're supposed to do. So even something as simple as us having a children's service in Sale, the children and the mammies more are trained for getting ready for their preschool years. We work with the 1 to 3 year olds, but you're giving mammy 2 years of training to be ready for preschool. And just having a staff team working with the children who are addiction aware, and then that we can work with the mammies when they're there. So I'm not saying that that's perfect in any way, shape or form, but it's that kind of thing of thinking a little bit differently, even as much as, like feeding the kids, but maybe you need a bit of practice cooking again. If you've been living in hostels, you lose the skill of cooking and preparing meals and managing that. So all of those kind of things of just being aware. One of the kind of the gaps that we see is around women who are using drugs who get pregnant, and the social workers will step in 2 weeks before the baby is born. If we could just bring that back a few weeks, months, just to allow for that process to have been worked on much, much earlier. And I know the social workers are stressed beyond and stretched, but if we can do that like 2 weeks beforehand, then we're in crisis. We're just maintaining the crisis. But
and to acknowledge that the women who are pregnant, because they are involved in addiction medicine, we know that they are pregnant from very early on. Oftentimes women will know by month 1 or month 2, and it's at that point we are engaging with social work, asking for support and pre-planning. And if there is a capacity assessment for it to be done at month 1 or month 2, that we actually can look at issues in relation to that. It is coming too late. And also, our women are often experiencing crisis pregnancy, and the state response is in crisis. So we don't take the time to stop and ask the woman what she actually feels about this pregnancy. What kind of a mother does she want to be? Because we engage her at a crisis child protection level all the time. We're not holding her as an expectant mammy. We are dealing with her as a drug-using woman who is also now pregnant. And so for many of our women, when they are pregnant or when their children are subject to child protection concerns, there is an intense scrutiny. And when the child is then removed into care, all of the scrutiny, which often can be seen by a woman that's very supportive, evaporates. And we know once you support mammy to support the kinship placement, that placement has got, or that family arrangement, sorry, it's not a placement, that family arrangement is far more likely to succeed because mammy can see and support the family functioning. But oftentimes once that child is removed into care, we totally bypass the mother and we no longer engage with her as a mother. She is still that child's mother. She may be parenting from afar, or she may be parenting very, very differently, but supporting the mother in her role as mothering and helping her to process that will support the family functioning also.
We're quite fortunate.
Is that okay?
Two very quick points.
Yeah, of course.
Just to say, one is that we have a social worker on our team, which makes a huge difference because social workers talking to social workers can be really great. And secondly, children change at puberty anyway. And so those extra supports need to be factored in.
Yeah, thanks.
Teenagers. It's me actually up there. I'm up next to questions.
Just one final question from Laura. Yeah.
Cross-departmental responses needed. I think Anna has given out an infograph to all of you in an orange page, but just to preface, the Department of Children have ongoing policy work, and there has been consultations with kinship carers, young people and parents, but we need the involvement of the Department of Social Protection, Housing, Justice, Higher Education and Health. It needs to be cross-departmental, and what that looks like with the Department of Social Protection is that all children in kinship care have an accessible financial support, fast-tracked access to welfare support such as the supplementary welfare allowance, back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance, fuel allowance without unfair means testing. That kinship carers have work leave similar to when someone takes on a child through adoption, that they're not having to step away from work and then losing out on employment and impacting upon their pensions as well. That DSP staff are recognising kinship care and that there's trauma-informed practice going on. In relation to the Department of Housing, we want to look at changing succession rules so that kinship carers can take over a tenancy or move into the family home when a parent does sadly die, preventing homelessness and avoiding children entering state care due to housing-related issues. And that is an issue that arises for family members when they step in during that period of loss. Also, access to home improvement grants so that when grandparent steps in, that she doesn't have to sleep on a couch in a cold room. In relation to the Department of Justice, that special guardianship order that's similar to what's available in the UK, reduce court costs and delays and implementation of Valerie's Law. We want the Department of Health to work alongside the Department of Justice on a health-led response and the upholding of the Citizens' Assembly Recommendation 22 of supporting kinship families. The Department of Higher Education, young people are not recognised in the same way as children with formal care experience, and they face unfair means testing in relation to access to a SUSI grant. They have to evidence estrangement from a parent. In relation to the Department of Health, the removal of means testing of medical cards so that young people have access to a medical card, and kinship carers are not having to skip meals in order to provide basic medical care, and also that prioritisation of health assessments, developmental and therapeutic supports, access to respite and carer health services as well, and the engagement with the Department of Justice in their policy work for kinship and drugs. The Department of Children are holding that piece and coordinating that, but we need the buy-in and support from all of those other departments to ensure that children are supported in a trauma-informed way as well as their carers. I think that's a summary is enough for me now, but there's some on your sheet there as well.
Thank you, Laura. I'm conscious, Deputy Ruan, we have to run off for a vote, so it's okay with members. Can I just switch with Deputy Ruan?
Thank you very much. It's really a brief question, but first of all, to acknowledge and thank Ray Dean for really emphasising the refuge piece, because I'm very aware of refugees turning women away if there is an inclination that there is substance use, especially if you've been referred by a local drug service, and the assumption of that. So you're removing the woman's capacity to even ask for help at a local level in case they make the referral, and So I just thanks for covering that so well. I think if I can just go to EPIC, I think Mr. Stanley said an interesting sentence that drug use, and I'm going to remove drug use, and I don't know whether you said drug use or addiction, but that it's a societal issue and not a consequence of being in care. And I'd just like to kind of zone in on that a little bit and kind of maybe, could you tease that out a little bit more, because so say when we look at homelessness, when we look at prison, we look at situations whereby addiction can be compounded or because of the circumstances. So obviously drug use is societal, but there's certain types of substance use, which is self-regulation, self-medication in response to a not okay environment. So just taking in the environmental factors, could you maybe just speak to that point, because I would imagine that you weren't saying that care as a whole doesn't have an impact on substance misuse, because obviously the type of care that's provided, how it's provided, how trauma informed something else, that all of those environmental factors would actually potentially have an impact on a person's engagement with a substance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I concur with everything you just said. The point I was, and perhaps I didn't phrase it correctly, the point I was trying to make is, or careful not to make, was to associate
not stigmatise those in care as being correlation. Completely.
There is causation there, but it's not correlation.
Exactly.
And that is, if we're going to think about it correctly, we need to look at each young person in the circumstances they're in, and we need to approach it in a trauma-informed way. And what we're saying, and that feeds into the later comments around the sort of specialised services that are needed for young people who are care experienced, because if you think about it in the context of addiction, the services that may be in place for young people for addiction won't necessarily work for care experienced young people, because they have different networks of support. Networks of support when you're dealing with children are often involved in therapeutic responses or to addiction and other issues. So that was really what I was trying to draw together.
Yeah, no, Grant. I just wanted to tease that, because I thought that's what you meant, and I just wanted to kind of, because it obviously stood out for me, because obviously if we're calling for bespoke responses to things, it's acknowledging then the connection between one thing and the other. So that's super helpful. Thank you.
You finished?
That's it.
Oh, excellent. We've reached part. We're conscious we are a good way into this engagement at the moment. If anybody feels like they'd have something they'd like to develop, if somebody hasn't spoken yet and you want to get something, feel free. Yeah.
Can I make a comment just in relation? I'm sorry, I know you're leaving right now. No, just in relation to reunification, because there's a couple of points there in just what even Gary raised. Just, I suppose, what we would see, or what we'd be hoping to see at all points, is that when a child comes into the care system, that reunification is being talked about at that point. Every child has a right to go home. Now, in certain circumstances, that's obviously not going to happen. But and as advocates, we'd be pushing that would be a consideration for all young people. Points as well. It's just that some of the circumstances around the safety nets and the actual fact that some of our families, our young people that we're working with, some of the families that they're our parents of those, actually those safety nets are very few and far between. And then the situation of, well, could it be my best friend? No, that we're going to have to look at your best friend and see what their life circumstances are or whatever. So I think some of the expectations around reunification can be really challenging for the families that we're engaging with. Yeah.
Sometimes goalposts change on people as well.
Yeah, and
different personalities coming into the fray.
Yeah. But I will say as well, and I just that we've seen some very good examples. They're slow, as Gary pointed out, but let's be slow and let's get those children back to where they want to be. The young people we work with are saying, always look at our families first. We know some of our families can't maybe have us back because of their circumstances, but always look at them first.
But some family members have been refused based on the fact that two of same-sex children would have to share a room, yet that's council policy that they will house you if you have same-sex children. So there's a real classes done.
Some of the hoops and loops are, you'd query that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, William.
Sorry, there was just another point, as Lynn raised it earlier around that reunification and the role of the, and this is with the other side of Troy's hat on, the non-marital families and the legal status of the fathers is so, difficult at times. If they're not married, they don't have rights to guardianship. They can get it through the court, they can get it through other ways, but often that puts them on the periphery, and there's a whole societal issue around how men care and the role of men in care that we need to look at and consider as well, because that's often excluded from the discussions, and we need to be thinking about how they're brought into the picture and what are the barriers for men and particularly fathers in relation to that role, where there isn't substance abuse, or even where there is.
Great. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Lynn. Just for my own contribution, I think there's been any number of moments during this particular session where a person's jaw would just hit the floor by some of the testimony that's been given. I mean, the idea and the concept and the image even and the reality that there is a person, a child or a young person who's getting a letter from the state asking to prove their own abandonment for me is just, it's incredible. I suppose my question is for the members, would it be okay in terms of we as a committee took to writing to the minister, the various departments asking about that practice? Because I mean, it'll probably feature in the document in 9 months, but I don't think we need to wait that long in terms of just challenging that practice. It's incredible. In terms of questions, Wayne, you were talking about the special care being used as the de facto detox unit. Could you describe what that, I think you said there was a lack of appropriate detox and rehabilitation services for young people in care, and in some cases special care is being used as a de facto detox unit. Could you expand on that a little bit in terms of what are the options for young people in care being able to access detox facilities? I think most of us...
I might.
Yeah, please, yes.
So I think principally that young person may have been placed on a special care order through the High Courts. They're entering into special care on a placement, and during their period in the placement, it's identified or has been pre-identified probably already, of course, that they have struggling with an addiction issue, and therefore it's being managed within the special care placement through a medical model. So it's not so much principle, maybe that's the purpose for the placement. It's a combination of welfare matters pertaining to that child that a special care order has been sought through the High Courts for them. And whilst placed within special care are addressing that, as I said, through the support of a medical team.
So the fore issue of that is that there isn't a placement for that young person to go into to deal with their addiction, which would have prevented the court order to place them into special care. And so special care are actually dealing with the substantive issue, which is actually their addiction, which actually, if there was a high support unit or residential placement that was appropriate to a young person with care experience, that you could have prevented ending up in special care. What's happening is special care is taking on that role. And the concern is, as special care, we all know the pressure it's under, is that actually are they going to be seen to be reach the standard of requiring court order in the context of all the other pressures that are on the system, and these young people are standing on the brink of being abandoned altogether. That's our genuine concern.
Just for Sale, in relation to short-term sentences for mothers, can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, it seems the punishment for that extends far beyond whoever the state believes is being punished. Well, maybe you can just develop that for us.
One of the things that, if you have a mother who is locked away, she's separated from her child, and the child is separated from their mother. So that just adds to the trauma that can be in place in prison. I suppose what we're really asking or asking to be considered is that there's no need for all of that to be happening. Surely we can come up with better ways, non-custodial ways, to punish the wrongdoing that society has a right to call out. We're kind of talking with probation at the moment and trying to come up with new ideas for women coming to Sale, rather than being imprisoned, so that they can be punished by us. Do you know, where
in a trauma-informed
in a trauma. So that, and that one of the huge benefits is that family unit can hopefully stay together. Now, that family unit is under stress, it's under pressure, so can we offer other kind of supports? But I think just that isolation, the separation, for me, is the number one element in the impact of...
Seems contrary to, on a number of fronts, but even just to the rights of a child.
Yes. Yeah.
And we do know from what we work as part of our BRIO programme, which is for justice involved women and women who use substances. We work in Dochas Women's Prison weekly, so we are aware of the growing numbers of women on very short sentences. The probation service in Dochas have recently spoken to us about women on 2-week sentences in the hope that they will receive a probation report within that time. But the disruption to that woman's life, the disruption and the actual the impact, the fracture in terms of family functioning of a 2-week sentence, that woman won't benefit from that. Even the probation service, their ability to turn around a probation report within that period of time is undermined. But the fracture to that family is absolutely huge. And our view is that no woman should be sentenced for 2 weeks for any crime, and that there is an alternative. There's alternative placements for women that are community-based that can hold them in that space. And we, amongst other people, are willing to do that because we believe it's good for the family, it's good for the mother, but it's good for society.
Thank you. Yeah,
I come in on that?
Yeah, Senator Costello,
Yeah. So I'm just a bit concerned by your statement that no woman should be put in prison for any crime. I think that's concerning.
Absolutely, I didn't say that. What I meant was no one should be committed to imprisonment for a short sentence of 2 weeks, which is what's happening for women at the moment. That certainly is. There's alternatives for placements in prison in a custodial, in a prison for 2 weeks. There's certainly alternatives for women in the community. A 2-week sentence is usually for a very small crime that could absolutely be dealt with through probation, through community sanctions. There's a whole range of options available to the court, but oftentimes the court are sentencing women to short-term sentences in order for them to actually get a probation report, which they're not getting in the community. So it's more of a systemic decision rather than actually for like a penal decision.
Senator Costello, you have a little bit more time left. You haven't contributed yet. Would you like to ask some questions or make any statements?
No, it's fine. No, I've been listening, so no, it's fine. I'm happy. I just wanted to question that. It was just that jumped out at me. I don't know if I did mishear you, but I just, like, I would have concerns for, children's well-being in all of this as well. And I do agree the supports really need to be in place for children. They have to be the centre of everything,
Thank you, Senator. If any of the deputies present would like to go again.
Yeah, it was more kind of just to go back to the idea of the family, the kids being fractured and sent around different places, either placement or in different houses to be reared, I suppose. And the more recent studies come out, I think, at the beginning of the year, which said that siblings actually have much more of an influence on us and who we become and how we are as we grow than our parents at times. So that connection there has to be, because you have a parent and, life goes on the life circle, but you have a connection always, all life, with your siblings, all your life, and they are quite influential. They're saying the significance of the influence of siblings. Just also then, just the comment on Tusla, and they're always the kind of the bad guys in the whole situation, or the bad women in the whole situation. But women do come in and are terrified of, I can't do this because Tusla will come to get me. And you've got to a stage where you just say, let them come on, take that away, just let them come, because they have an obligation to protect your children and you. So, and then you kind of, I'll be in your corner or whatever like that, and that's what you guys do. So it's kind of changing that attitude. If Tusla had the time, the energy, the staff, remit to do that, to change that whole idea of there as a punishment as opposed to an enabler and a helper. And the other thing, the last thing I'll say is I'm party spokesperson for gender and domestic violence, and we're launching like the Zero Tolerance campaign, and it's been really quite challenging to get men involved, because men think it's a woman's problem when actually it's not a woman's problem, it's a man's problem. But look, we're working on that as a society. So, and what's missing in this, and somebody did mention the daddies, but the mammies are kind of always the go-to, and that's the way it is. But the fathers just also need to be remembered and guided into, you know, their children, because that is another kind of sensible, maybe hopefully adult that can root and secure the children as well. But we certainly they're not in the conversation a lot, just to note that, and the half of the population. Okay, thank you very much. It's been a great to and fro.
Deputy Graves.
Taken anybody away from their family for 2 weeks, like, I mean, what sort of crime would it be anyway? They tend to be petty, and I think, you know, when we're talking about the drugs and the work of the Drugs Committee, we're looking at health-led approaches, you know, so it would be far better to take that approach to women in particular. I mean, these aren't kind of serious crimes, you know, and the trauma and the disruption that it has on their lives and that of their families. So definitely I get it. Secondly, I probably, you know, I think it would be very useful if we made the case that, you know, in terms of the strategy that's coming up, that the voice of the people here have to be heard. We're getting it with a lot of groups that we're meeting, that they feel that they have been distanced from the whole drafting of the next, of the strategy, and I think that's something that we'll raise here as a committee. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Graves. Would anybody like to? Yeah, Damien.
Anna reminded me of an issue that emerges for kinship carers specific to the guardian's payment, when that kinship carer is also in a caring role for their vulnerable adult son or daughter, that in that situation, due to the technicality of that son or daughter living under the roof, even if they're not in that caring role, that they won't be approved for a guardian's payment, and that is something that crops up as well. And just, I wanted to put on the record the voice of a young person at yesterday's conference. Kinship is more than blood. It is the people who stay when life breaks. And that's a young person who's travelled up through the process of being cared for by kin. And I think she highlighted that her aunt had paid up to €20,000 in counselling services from the age of 8 to 18 to get her to a space where she was able to speak and really fluidly and well. So just to put that on the record as well.
And just to add, the simple thing of having an access to a medical card that would allow her to access services that she didn't have to necessarily go through privately is a huge part. That children in care, in formal care, get access to that. Children in kinship care don't get access to that. And it's just, you are in care. You're in care of a family that loves you and supports you, but you're still in care, and they're not recognising that. But just to come back to two other points, I think in relation to TUSLA, and you know, some of these issues are so systemic. You know, I'm talking to people in this room that know this, that poverty, social exclusion, racism are at the heart of a lot of the societal issues that we're talking about. Whether, you know, and TUSLA's PPFS, the Prevention, Partnership and Family Support Programmes, is so much less invested in than the child welfare supports, and it's not that one should, it's that they both need equal investment. They both need to be invested in if we're talking about the preventative measures as much as, you know, the responding to the crisis that's there. And we everybody here has talked about that early intervention and supports the preventative is important. And when you then talk, I mean, some of my work in the background is still involved with Fiona and others around the Traveller projects and work, and Travellers are hugely important in kinship care. I've done it long before it was recognised, and long before that support that the community, the family raises the children and supports the family. The specific needs, when you're talking about those voices that are excluded from all the supports and services around culturally appropriate supports. And I know there's another committee today where TUSLA, we met them in the hallway around the Traveller project. But they need to be in here. There needs to be so much crossover. The intersectionality of all of those things are really, really important. And so I just think that we can't take away from the investment in the preventative work, and it doesn't always need to be a social work response. There's so much more sports out there, and we need to move away from the medicalisation of all this into a much more community responses.
Yeah, Fiona.
I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points, and particularly in relation to the siblings, or the brothers and sisters, as our kids would call them. They're so important, and particularly when there's family addiction. Your older brother, your older sister, your little sister, you have these even more enhanced bonds because they become everything to you. One of the greatest ways to protect them bonds is kinship care when things break down in a family, because what we see happen more, it's more likely that the kins will go together, the brothers and sisters will go together, than when they move into care, because it's very hard to place 4 or 3 together. But for grandparents, for aunties, that needs the support, and particularly the financial support. In relation to what's all being proposed in terms of next steps and supports, we've talked a lot about the statutory services. You know, obviously we want, you know, the income support payments, we want the housing with the local authorities. But I think for most families with kinship care, community supports are very, very important, because most don't want to engage with TUSA and probably don't need to after a certain point, because once children kind of move for a period of time and the parents are satisfied that that's the arrangement with the right community supports, they can manage that themselves, and it can be fluid and flexible. And when things change for the parents, there can be arrangements that I suppose are agreed by all family members, and I think that's in the best interest of children. So yeah, I think we need to invest in community service to support kinship carers, and they're very practical supports.
Because we are a small programme, we rely a lot upon the partnership, and we have established a number of pilot peer groups within family resource centres, and the impact of that when you get information to someone at the right time in terms of access to the community-based supports, in terms of access to early education, in terms of access to financial support, and in terms of access to meeting other people who are navigating the same journey and seeing yourself reflected in the person that's sitting across from you. So there's huge worth in that, and we have relied a lot upon that partnership with F4Cs as well to get some of that over the line, but that's in every other community-based programme as well that we'd like to see. Sorry, interrupting there.
No apologies. Gary, and then Wayne.
Yeah, just briefly, just say to Anne that we'll add our voice to not necessarily feeling heard in the community, just to say thanks for raising that. And I suppose the other one is to acknowledge the work of the probation service. That we can knock people, but social workers are often probation officers, and the probation officers tend to have a really positive relationship with the women we work with, and to mark that, and to also mark the fact that Rachel Lillis and her team in working on the women's strategy has been really, really helpful, and maybe something similar could be done within social work if that hasn't been done already. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Wayne?
Yeah, just to follow on what Damien's point around the kind of early prevention models, just go back to the final point in the opening statement around the upstream services. That's the potential to go into schools to meet young people in their safe space many times, to have an initial conversation with them. Peter Mackey, who I've referenced in it, talks about it being the whisper before the conversation. So it's speaking to those children in their safe space, and they give the potential to identify that there's something going wrong at home, and then you offer support. It's not that social workers rush in or anybody rush in. There's an offer of support to the family. And one of the issues in any area of social work or social policy is upstreaming is usually really expensive, because you're trying to hit thousands of families in the hope that you hit 1 or 2 who are going to end up in crisis. This is a way of doing something that's really broad but also really targeted. And I encourage the committee to take a look at that, because conversations are starting to happen to it in the Department of Housing around youth homelessness, but in terms of this cohort of young people and that getting the support to families early, I think it's a really useful model.
Thank you, Wayne. Deputy Robinson, would you like to come back in? No? You okay?
Okay.
Okay. Would anybody like to, if there's a point that said that hasn't been made? Shawnee, I'm conscious you haven't spoken yet. As this room is usually for politicians, that blows my mind. So just if you did want to say anything. No? Thanks. Well, today, folks, thank you so much for lending us your expertise. Anna, thank you for sharing with us your pain. I think within that we have a responsibility then to also go and act upon that. So yeah, this is, I don't want to say this was a beyond an interesting session. We all learned a lot of things that we wish we didn't have to learn, but then we have to go and rectify. So thank you. I'm sure you'll see in the report that we'll do, you'll see your own testimony reflected in that. Thank you. Thank you. Cut.
Anything coming through? Oh, I think we're working there now, are we? Well, hey, that looks like it's good anyway. Give me a thumbs up there or something in the hot box. Yeah, S-House has got you now. Give me a sec here now, and I'm going to close this thing down behind me. Boom, there we go. Lovely jubbly, you can see me now. Oh, let's fix this mic. Boom. So yeah, that was an informative meeting, I suppose. The contributions there by the witnesses, they were, again, like I'm not gonna lie, I suppose they were a nice one. DT, you can hear me loud and clear. They definitely were like touching. They really get you at the heart. Parents losing kids, kids taken from families, being brought up in broken homes, all of those difficulties that a person would face at the earlier part of their life, leading to the risk of becoming addicted to drugs, further easing of escapism, using those drugs as a means to escape from the reality in which you're living. And then those people being treated like criminals, put at the mercy of organised crime gangs, of unscrupulous individuals within a community who would be willing to prey upon those vulnerable people. Let me adjust this there. Well, too far. That's about enough. But yeah, that issue never been really called out. It was... it's right there, it's right in front of them, but nobody really willing to kind of say, come here, legalisation is needed, the end of the war on drugs is needed. These people being preyed upon by these individuals, it needs to be brought to an end. It can't go on. It's been shown that prohibition doesn't work. Alcohol being the most obvious model that's available to us, because it was prohibited back in, whenever it was, the 20s, the 30s. Of the 1900s? Yeah, you gotta point that out now, because we're in the 20s here now, in the 2000s. But yeah, prohibition doesn't work, and it's been shown at this session that it doesn't work. It's just not being called out. We're hearing the fallout of it, problems of it. They brought up drug debt intimidation, drug-related violence. They brought up domestic violence there, and I think again the prohibition increases the risks there for those women, because they don't want to be inviting guards into the house, because they're probably engaged in maybe illegal drug use themselves. Maybe their partner living in the house is engaged in illegal drug use, and they're living in a council house, and they don't want to be bringing that problem on them. They'll deal with the domestic violence themselves, which it's just horrible. What's Mr. Finnegan saying there? No, I can still see her mug. Move the camera a bit more. My mug is over there, boy. What are you on about? Just don't have any tea in it. But nice one, everybody contributing there in the hot box, having the old conversation throughout that today. It was good. Let's just hope that that this is built upon. As I say, it's quite obvious that prohibition poses a problem there, but another big problem. You heard the figures that were given out there about the money to take care of the kids in care. If we were to give them, I can't remember exactly what it was that she said, but one amount was like 2.36 billion if we were to give them all the best care that they actually needed. It said then the next one was like 20 odd million or 200 odd million to take care of them at a different level, maybe halfway, and what we're actually paying, which was 23 million, I think she was saying. It's like you're hearing this, and I unfortunately have kind of had first-hand experience there, and seeing kids being failed within that system, and can see it's only obvious as to why we have so many people going into addiction, at young ages. Pressure on these services only continuing to grow. These service providers, have we seen throughout the last couple of meetings, there's just a lack of resources there for them, and meanwhile the amount of people requiring those resources continues to grow. It's insane. And something that was said in the first meeting, there's no accountability here. No wonder it's happening. Absolutely no accountability. Colin Burke, he's a member of that committee. He opened thought it because he's not contributed at all, really, only to excuse himself or to say sorry that he had to excuse himself or something in that regard. He was sitting there online, he was on the Zoom meeting or something, but he was muted, camera was off. It's like, come on, was he even there? Was he even listening? I met that guy one-to-one at a meeting in his constituency office, and within 5 minutes I could tell that he knew absolutely nothing about drugs. Oh, I've been at this centre, I've been at that centre, we've approved this amount of money. But when it came to actually talking about drugs, drug addiction and stuff like that, he knew nothing. He couldn't actually engage in the conversation. He always had to divert the conversation off to, but we gave this much to this place, so we opened this centre, we're helping this many people. It's ridiculous. But again, no accountability, nothing at all. He doesn't even have to keep his camera on to show that he's there watching and engaged. I'd say there's more accountability to students in college to having to engage in their classes online. Maybe they're required to actually have their camera on to show that they're actually sitting there. But yeah, no surprises at all. Looking forward to the next couple of meetings anyway. I think there's going to be, that was the third, I think there might be 3 more meetings. I have not seen an actual running order of the meetings. I'll have a quick look as we're kind of chit-chatting here as to what's up there on their site. So the next meeting, it's been up here, that's the current one that just went ahead. When did they update this? Last updated on the 9th, which is today. So yeah, normally they release the running order of the next meeting anyway in the next couple of days. So we'll know more about the meeting again next week, but we will be on here, we'll get the stream out, and we'll see what everybody has to say. But again, thanks everybody who contributed there to the hot box, who was here watching this with us today. Hopefully you might learn something. Hopefully you don't get too disheartened by the fact that they're just still talking, as it was called out again in the first meeting, that what the hell are we doing here still talking about this? We've got 2 really good reports, recommendations, the Citizens Assembly, the last joint committee on drug use. Why are we talking about it again was what she said. Forgive me for not remembering who it was that actually said that, but it was agreed upon that, look, we don't need to be waiting 9 months for another report to be put together by this committee, and they're going to get it out a bit faster than that. So yeah, anything else to add? I don't at the moment. Anybody else have anything to add out there in the hot box? Say it now or forever. Hold your peace. We do got one more bowl packed up here, I suppose. Let's engage in a little bit of civil disobedience. The mic was a bit out of order last week and the week before, so we have it back in order now. So let's get the civil disobedience back here, and you can hear that sound that you would have heard so many times before. Shall we? Yeah, let's use this lighter. I was over in Spain there recently, managed to get at the Salou. Long time since me and the family managed to get on a holiday, and visited a social club there. It was really nice. So the lighter here just reminded me of the social club. It was really nice, enjoyed it. The cannabis was nice there. The hash was nice, or Brought my own with me, and maybe I have a little bit of bias in that, but in saying that the cannabis I brought from Ireland was nicer than what we got there. Some locally grown holiday special, but again, it might be biased in that, not a grower, and it came from Cork as well. That probably has a big influence on my bias. But anyhow, let's get the civil disobedience done. Well, yeah, it's been a while since doing a little bit of civil disobedience here through the mic. Getting the feedback of that and bang through the headphones. Yeah, DT, not a problem. I'll happy out to get the stream on here to just get this to the attention of more people. This will go past the attention of so many people not knowing that these meetings are actually happening. Because look who's over there really going to the Oireachtas TV, who in the Oireachtas is getting it out there to the public that, hey, we're having a meeting here on drug use and this could be of interest to you. Like there's very little attempt by him actually to get notification out for contributions that normally has come through the networks of the services, the activists. It's never really by the politicians, the policymakers, to kind of go out there into their constituency to say, hey, look, we're looking for contributions there from the public. Anybody out there in the community want to have their say? Tell us about how, drug dealing and the organised crime gangs are affecting your community. A couple of housing estates come to mind here and even across the country, but I won't say anything there. But no, they don't really, they don't do that. 420 talk, or what's happening, says, is there not legalisation coming from Flanagan in May? Something along the lines there, isn't there some movements being made within Europe, the European Union? So hopefully something good comes out of them. From what I understand, I think it's just a change in how they see the cannabis plant in regard to hemp. I think a change in the technicalities there, the percentages or something like along those lines. But it could have knock-on consequences apparently for countries within Europe and their ability to legalise cannabis. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there within Europe. Didn't realise it was coming in May, so that's still a bit away, unfortunately. In fair trade, is it? Fair trade cannabis. Again, it'd be great if we could. I seen Steve mentioned it above, actually, the Irish Canna Clinic. Finding the whole thing depressing, and across Europe today that Spain has just announced their new legalisation, which makes the MCAP look progressive. It's shocking, he says, and I can concur with that. If it looks the MCAP, Medical Cannabis Access Programme, Ireland's Medical Cannabis Access Programme, if it makes that look progressive, then geez, that is shocking. Spain, who in certain regions was pretty much initially up around the Catalonian region, but it spread from there, the cannabis clubs and all of that kind of stuff. But it looks now that they're kind of stepping back on that. Hair clubs are closing. Initially heard it was because of the association of the dealing of other drugs from some of these clubs happening. But it seems now maybe there's more pressure there being put by the government through the different, the policia, civil policia, isn't that what they're called over there in Spain? But that is depressing to hear if they're kind of going backwards like that over in Spain. But there's no need to do it. They should be really just looking at how to regulate it properly, how best to protect patients, and how best to provide safe and affordable cannabis to adults who choose to consume cannabis. It's what in the name of God are they playing at? But anyhow. Casa de Strugas, nice to see you out there. This is how they control the narrative, by keeping the discussion on the law and exclude free thought. Yeah, no, the nail on the head there, but that's exactly why they do it. And that's why, look, we do what we do, isn't it? We need to be kind of staying up to date in this and getting the word out there, informing the public, and doing all that we can to change that narrative. And I think we've done a lot. Unfortunately, it's taken a long time. But look, we haven't given up. You're still out there doing your thing. I'm still here doing our thing. And there's many others out there doing their thing as well. We are going to see the day when the change is going to come. The pressure is, like, at least in my eyes, it looks like it's growing, it's gaining, and it's going to be getting a point. Hopefully, there's going to reach that breaking point. But let's see what happens. Where are we now? We're in October, so we have a couple of months there before their summer holidays. Let's hope that recommendation for this report to get out there earlier than 9 months is kind of listened to. And let's hope that they're going to be brought to task, the government, on this issue, and they won't be able to hide behind their summer holidays and kick that can down the road like they normally do. I know if they're what is it, they have to come up with a bill that's going to take them a couple of months. That's going to bring them past the summer holidays anyway, really, isn't it? Yeah. Let's not lose hope. Let's keep the optimism high. Civil disobedience is key, guys. I don't see why we shouldn't actually be just engaging in a little bit of civil disobedience, exercising our rights. I know there's many ways in which we could do that beyond what I just do here and consume my cannabis illegally. What I once did, and go and hand it into guards and all of that kind of silly stuff that I did. But look, actually, the handing cannabis into guards, that kind of was an interesting one when I used the CBD flower. The plants played out a little bit differently. Currently have a 2-month suspended sentence. Don't know, just a bit more than a year left on that suspended sentence. That was just a little bit different, but I wouldn't change anything. I was happy I done that. Would potentially go do it again. Maybe if somebody else was leading the charge and we were able to get a number of people, I wouldn't even mind leading the charge if we could have a good number of committed people to come and do it alongside me. One plant, how many would be willing to put a little bit of dirt down on top of that? That seemed to be the focus of the court. The fact that the camera showed me putting in and putting the dirt there, the active cultivation. So you could have like a big whole plant and just slowly put a little bit of dirt in, one scoop at a time. 420 talk, or yeah, legend. Leave it with me. Let's see. Going to be back chatting with the guys at the Grassroots Social Club later on this evening. There's talks of another event happening coming up back towards the Christmas time. So another gathering of civil disobedience. Should I say? I don't know. We'll talk with the guys later and see how I should talk about this, actually. Don't want to be causing any problems on my first night back. Step back for a while, as you well know, as the stream hasn't been going for a while. Thank God we got the excuse, I suppose, to be back on here because of these Oireachtas committee meetings. But it is good to be back on here. It's good to be back out there training as well, doing a little bit of Thai boxing. That's good. And we'll continue to do that. Hopefully get some more regular streams, maybe some interviews up there. And as I say, a little bit of activism out there in public. Any footage from the first gathering? There was lots gathered from the first gathering. There was a lot of videos put up across Instagram is where they were posted. A lot of stories had them. But I do know that there's definitely footage gathered that could be used to put back out there, more videos. But hopefully you've seen some of it that time. Maybe you're not as active on Instagram and you missed it. I'll see if I can dig some up for you, Casa. B Moon says there's an natural mystic blowing through the air. Yes, indeed. I'm tempted now to pack up another bowl, but I know there's a tasty fish pie inside that is going to be ready for eating. I was up early this morning getting the dinner ready, so I'm going to get stuck into that there now shortly. Casa says, happy harvesting, everyone, and glad to see Martin Healthy on the stream. Give him the one too. Yes, we will indeed, Casa. Nice one. It's good to see yourself out there and everybody else as well. Nice one, guys. Until next time, I suppose. Stay blessed. Keep it lit. Much love. Bye bye.